Okay, hi everyone. I promised I would make a video, so here I am. Today in class, just a reminder, we mixed our China paints for the first time. I also showed you how to transfer with graphite one of your drawings. So certainly start drawing if you haven't, like I had mentioned. Here are a couple of my drawings, for example, that I'm going to use today. These are a bit on the small side, but they're still going to work for kind of the test tile that I'm doing today. So again, a friendly reminder that I put a PDF as far as like bullet points of a bunch of things to remember for China painting, aka overglaze enamels, lusters, and then I also have some information on how to apply the decals. I also have the firing temperatures on the PDF, so take a look at that. And then today we're going to spend the majority of our time just mixing up the paint and having me show you a couple of methods for like draftsmanship, essentially, kind of a blueprint for you to follow with your paints. On the PDF, I mentioned that with your China paints, you are going to have a choice as far as what you mix the powder with. There are a whole bunch of different choices. You can see that sugar's an option, and then there are a whole bunch of different oils. The way that the oils are categorized is going to be, we have really wet oils that do not dry, and those are called an open medium. And then we have drying oils like lavender oil that do dry quickly, and you can achieve different effects with each one. Again, I want to mention that with the overglaze enamels, the key is to layer multiple layers, and not just when you're painting this first time, but through the firing. So multiple layers through the process of firing, multi-fire process. So kind of keep that in mind as well. On your PDF, it also mentions that you need 3 different vials or little bowls like this where you can keep your terpenoid, which is the solvent for all of these oils that you're using as your medium. So keep that in mind. You're going to need 3 dishes. You're going to try and get the most gunk and China paint off in this first one, and then you're going to wipe it on a paper towel. Then you're going to move on to the second one, clean it again, and then the third one is your final cleaning for your brushes. You can also use the terpenoid to create different effects with the China paint if you want it to break in certain areas or pull away from itself. So keep that in mind. I'll show you guys how to do that. But I've got some thinner here. So I'll go. Just going to use a little bit for now. Preferred over these guys would be if you could get your hands on a bunch of little vials that are big enough for you to get your brush into. So I think if you could find 3 of these, maybe just slightly larger than that. Let's see if I have my example over here, my larger one. This one right here. So you can kind of see the size of that. These are really nice. This is my dirty terpenoid one. So you know, I could certainly even do a 4 batch if I wanted to. All right, so, you know, we're doing this on top of glazed surfaces for now. You can experiment if you want to with unglazed surfaces later on, but for now I'm just teaching you the most traditional application of the overglaze enamels. The first thing that you want to do is you want to use isopropyl alcohol on your glazed surface to make sure that you don't have any dust and that you don't have any oil. And so I may start with a cotton ball, but then what I would probably finish with is I want for you all to have a dust-free cloth. So for example, I've got kind of a microfiber guy here, and as a final step, I will kind of try to buff away and make sure I don't have any excess on there. I can still see a little bit of residue, so I might go over one more time. A lot of the tiles that I'm providing you with in the class are kind of old, so you might want to really spend that extra time right around in here. Okay, so my surface is nice and clean. Ideally, I don't want to really touch this. I could set it aside while I prepare my China paints. if I wanted to. So I'm gonna just put it right over here on top of a plate that I have. I mentioned last class that you can use a couple of different things for, as palettes for mixing your China paints. I have this really nice palette that I purchased at an estate sale, and it's a piece of glass, and then we've got the white enameled metal underneath. You can simply just use an old piece of glass that you have. If you do use an old piece of glass, I highly recommend that you put a white sheet of paper underneath just so you can see your colors true to color. So, for example, I have this. Before class started earlier today when I gave the demo, I did wipe away my surface and I made sure that it was clean. So you could certainly do that again in the areas that don't have the paint already mixed in. Just trying to get rid of, I know cotton has little fibers that are left behind, so I'm just trying to get those away. Paper towels do work quite, pretty well for this. And we had some good questions today. One of the questions was, can I keep my mixed paints for use at another date? And the answer is yes, you can. So just keep in mind that if you just have the glass, you might want to, cover the top with saran wrap. Be careful if you do use a saran wrap to not get it touching to the top surface. So if you could create some sort of, you can see how this has kind of a lip right there. If you could create a slight lip so that the saran wrap doesn't touch your paints, that would be perfect. In this case, I have the nice palette, so I don't have to really worry about that. All of you guys are going to be using a small palette knife like this to mix your paints. You can also use, in the class I showed you guys, they're just the flat palette knives that are slightly more flexible than this one right here. Okay, and the first thing I mentioned is a little bit goes a long way. You can always check out estate sales as well for China paints to get a good deal. I also talked about the fact that all of our pinks and rose and purple colors, they are actually made not with oxides but with gold. And so keep in mind that those are a little bit pricier. I had also mentioned, and it's available in your PDF, that gold should be fired, or I'm sorry, pinks and purples should be fired at 017. That's their preferred temperature versus 018. So keep that in mind. For example, I've got a pink right here that is available to me. But I think for today, I'm going to start with, what do I have here? Pompadour red, absolutely. And let's see, hair brown, I don't know. Let's see, rose is available. Oh, let's go for some black. Traditionally, with Overglaze enamels, people suggest, and I guess I suggest to go from lightest to darkest with your colors. So keep that in mind as well, that you want to build the color, again, through the firing process. And then keeping in mind your different options for your mixing media. And so you've got here, for example, what I've provided for most of you is this Willoughby's. I have finally found that that paper that tells us exactly what's within this mixture, but Willoughby's is probably one of the best known producers and sellers of the China paints these days. And Willoughby's makes their own recipe for a medium. Oftentimes it'll be like a linseed oil, a clove oil, and then a mineral oil mixed together. And then the oil that you choose depends on kind of the result you want to get. So the open ones, they provide a little bit more drag on your brush, so some people like that. I quite like the drying oil just because I'm able to move a little bit faster. So for example, over here on the left, I have the lavender oil. So lavender oil is a drying oil. And then over here I have the open oil. And you just have to be a little bit more careful with this one to mix it thick enough so that it doesn't just, with heat and then also just with time, like dissipate into a puddle. So keeping that in mind. All right, as far as the ratio of oil to powder, I would say for the amount of powder that you have, I would do just shy of a half of the amount of oil on to the right of it. So for example, let's say, you know, if I had, let's do a little example. Another thing, a little bit of this material goes a long way. So you're gonna wanna start just by mixing up a very small amount for your test tiles. If you decide you really like a color, then you can mix up a large batch, and then I would highly recommend getting some little pots like this, or some little glass ones with lids that you can then store your paint inside of so that it doesn't dry out. And if you mix it with an open oil medium, it won't dry out for, I mean, a very, very long time, if not a couple of years, to be quite honest with you. But if you mix it with the lavender oil or another closed medium, then you're gonna run into a different story. So we'll do the red with the open Willoughbys. I also have, there's a whole bunch of different things on the market. I would really look at like the viscosity of it, so kind of turn them and see how thick they are and make your decisions based off of that. If you're using a castor oil or a peanut oil, they get really gummy. The surface gets gummy after being out for a while, so those are not my favorite. I like kind of these premix, and there's a whole bunch of recipes out there. I'm gonna add maybe just a tiny bit over here in the corner just in case I want to use more. Again, remember that your palette knife should be nice and clean, so I just kind of kept my little alcohol cotton ball, and then I'm going to use that that little microfiber lint-free towel to remove any excess. So I'm just going to take my first little corner over here, and you're simply going to start by mixing kind of back and forth, and then going vertically, maybe adding just slightly more paint. Always making sure that you're getting the excess off of the top of the palette knife, so not to waste it essentially. And then once you have your general mixture made and it looks like a nice thick paste, really pigmented, you can do thinner ones if you want to, but for your kind of source, the source of all of the color, you want kind of a thicker paste, and then you can thin it out as needed, kind of a thing. So I'm just trying to get all of that material over here. It's kind of granulated just from being stored in the actual vial. So a final step is they like to mix in circles, China painter, so a little bit of a circle and then moving that material again towards itself. Waste not, want not is my philosophy. Oh, a quick tip, a lot of these have lead in them, especially the older China paints. If you are concerned about that, there is a brand that I mentioned earlier. It's called PBO. It's a water-based China paint, so you can always try that if you want to. Up to you. So I can see now when I press down my palette knife, I can't really see any granules, so I know that I have a nice mixed batch of China paint. If you wanted to, you could use a clean brush to kind of scrape off the excess and load up that brush a little bit, and maybe even create like a thinner section of it over in here. So all options for you. Again, I'm going to start dirtiest over here and go to cleanest just because, well, that's where I'm at. So I've got some paper towel over here that I'm going to use. And I'm simply wiping it off with paper towel and then doing like a final cleaning. In my next pot, you can see I'm still getting a tiny bit of red off, wiping off the brush, and then going into my final little batch of turpenoid. And then I have a nice clean brush ready to go for another color. Same thing, we want a nice clean palette knife, so I'm going to take the time to kind of wipe off my palette knife right there. Make sure I don't have any lingering China paint. But I had mentioned that these have lead in them, so a lot of people, they like to mix and work with nitrile gloves. I don't have any on hand. I actually usually do wear nitrile gloves for this, but alas, it's not available to me because despite the fact that I brought 4 different cases of things to school today, I forgot nitrile gloves. All right, so let's move on to black. Typically, you may want to say black till you've done several firings, unless you want to create an outline that you're then filling in with lighter colors. But I'm going to use the drying oil for this, the lavender oil. You want a pretty, that's not the lid for that. Oh my goodness, silly lady. You want to keep your paints relatively far apart from one another just so that you have room to dip and thin and mix in some places. So these can be mixed, yes, and you will get different colors. I'd also encourage you to think of the mixing of color as different layers that you're putting on top. So for example, if I wanted a grayish green, I would put down maybe a layer of gray, a layer of darkish green that's a thin wash, and then fire it, kind of a thing. And then apply maybe a key lime green and then fire that, and then maybe apply like a final yellow coat and apply that. So really think about how you can layer these materials to get a lot of depth in your results. So the drying oils, they tend to come out a little bit faster. Or I'm sorry, the drying oils. Okay, oh my goodness, I'm on par. Whew. So they tend to come out a little faster and they're thinner as well. So you may need a tiny bit less than you need with the open ones. So just keep that in mind. The more oil, however, that you have with the drying, the longer it'll stay wet in comparison to it drying out. So again, I'm going side to side, bringing that material, and then I'm simply compressing it, and then I'm going to start by circle motions. Make sure that we're screwed up enough here. I hope you guys can see everything. I think I placed the camera in the correct location. But you can see even when I go really thin with it on the glass, it's already kind of drying. So keep that in mind. I'll show you a couple of things that you can do with the drying oil. Ideally, if I had one of those flat palette knives, I would use that to get the excess material off. I provided you guys with wipeout tools, so you could certainly kind of use that silicone wiping tool to also remove any of your excess paint. Wait for it to just kind of drip down so we're not wasting. Again, I know, so redundant, but you know what? You leave school, you have your own studio. Some of you might already have your own studio. You guys know what it means to buy materials. They're not cheap. Another pointer that I just wanted to mention is you don't necessarily always have to paint with these overglaze enamels onto a flat surface. It could simply be to like highlight areas like this that are like skin, so I could certainly put like a rose in here or a purple, and you can use them to kind of highlight the surface. This is somewhere in between a matte and a gloss, and China paints will still work on this. The biggest thing with your glaze that you have to look for with the overglaze enamels and China paints is you don't want any crazing, because the oil will seep into the cracks of your glaze, and then you're gonna get obviously kind of like a faux raku look that you probably didn't want. So you wanna make sure that whatever glaze you use has a really good fit, you don't have any crazing, and it's just a happy little glaze. So I'm gonna put my little palette over here to the side. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'm gonna get on my stool and double check. Okay, cool, you can see it. Fantastic. All All right, and then I'm gonna go back to my little tile. And now I'm gonna show you how to transfer on an image for yourself as a guide to follow. So you could have composed something, an image in Photoshop. You could have drawn something in your sketchbook that you want to kind of quickly place onto the surface of the tile without having to painstakingly like redo the drawing process. So I've got some little shoes that I was drawing a couple days ago, and I just made multiples of them. I have on the back of this, let's see, here's a clearer photo. This is like an outline of a mask that's floating in the ocean. So really all I would need is this outline, and then I could fill in the gaps with the paint. So that's kind of helpful to just have outlines sometimes. I've got these two as well. Maybe we'll start with this one this time. Last time I did a shoe. This one's a little bigger, so we'll start here with these kind of demon-like creatures. You can go, honestly, you guys, the Metropolitan Museum of Art website is amazing, and I would highly recommend that you guys go on there and look at paintings, okay? Emphasis on paintings, drawings. I would look at illuminated manuscripts because they use a lot of gold gilding and like filigree details and things that I think very much lend themselves to these processes. So if you're not familiar with illuminated manuscripts, get in there, check it out. But we're back to transferring. So I've got my image here. I want to flip it over, and on the back side of my image, I want to use my graphite pencil and apply a really nice thick layer onto the back of this, nice and even if you can. And again, plenty of the graphite. All right, so once you got a nice layer here, you're gonna flip this over. What you can do is you can then place it on top of your tile. You could, if you want to, cut this out slightly smaller than your platter or your tile or whatever you may be using, and you could certainly use masking tape to tape it onto the actual tile just to secure it even better than what I have here. But for the purpose of this, I am just gonna hang out here. You can use the tip of the pencil. You could use, any of you have those like wood sculpting tools that are pointy? Those certainly would be great. A lot of paint brushes have a really nice pointed base to them. So you could certainly use the back of the paintbrush as well. Up to you, personal preference. I did my pencil last time, but this time I'm gonna try this for a little portion of it, so the back of my paintbrush. And so I'm gonna start kind of over here, and I'm simply gonna go over this. You know what, that sounds terrible. Use your pencil. Changed my mind. And I'm simply using this as a means to transfer the majority of the information onto my tile. And I will know in my mind that those are supposed to be much thicker. I'm going to do kind of this beak area, something like so. A line here, a bunch of lines here. you'll probably have to sharpen your pencil a couple of times, especially for really detailed works. Okay, and then what I would do before I completely lift the image off is I would make sure to kind of check like this and see that I can see the faint outline from the pencil itself, the graphite from the pencil. And I see that I have it, so I'm okay. I could have maybe applied a little bit more pressure there, but you guys can see it's pretty faint, but it's enough of a guide that it's quite helpful. Obviously, the softer pencil that you use, the more it's going to kind of shed off more of that material, so it'll be easier to lay it down. So we'll start there with this guy. I may even keep my photograph in front of me as a reference point. And what I will probably do is just simply lay down the base coats for myself. If you wanted to, from this point, a lot of artists, they like to use Sharpie as their guide as well. So if I wanted to come in and make this darker for myself, the Sharpie will fire out. I could certainly come in here. Oh, I have not had enough water today, so I'm starting to shake. And I could come in here and apply more details and lines that I could then follow. So something like so. Come in here. And again, this is just kind of a quick little reference, quick sketch. And then I will continue to reference my actual drawing. Well, it's getting a little tight. We're gonna have to move that guy over. Something like that. So it can be kind of like a sketch is what I'm trying to get at. Okay, I'm missing that right there. Alright, so something like that. You can also use the Sharpie if you're interested in creating kind of a border or a pattern. You could use one of these nice thin floppy rulers, and you could come in and line some areas for yourself to follow. Ooh, those 3 shots of espresso, they're working on my hands. So you could certainly come in here. Lay down something like that. You could even use one of these nice little angled pieces to create certain patterns. And so on and so forth. Okay? And you could even go as far as actually measuring the spacing and being very precise. For the purpose of this demo, I'm not going to go there. I will send you a link of an artist who does go there often, and she's very brilliant. She studied in Jingdezhen and has a lot of experience mixing like production low fire techniques with fine art. So she's a good example. So there I have kind of an outline for myself, just a little one, and I know this is kind of a quick run through, but you get the general idea, and then hopefully when I have some time to just kind of really enjoy myself and paint away, I can have something a little bit more in depth for you guys. But I may start with move these guys over, bring my palette, this was my lavender oil. I'm going to put, both of these are my drying oils, so I'm going to put a little bit of extra lavender down there that I can use to pick up and thin as I want. I can work a little faster on my first layer if I use a drying medium, so in a drying oil, so that can be another reason you may want to use the lavender oil in comparison to like the Willoughby's. Okay, I'm paranoid, so I'm gonna double check that I'm still recording before I get really into depth on my painting. Okay, we're still going. Oh my goodness, we're already at 30 minutes. How did that happen? Hopefully you're not bored. Okay, and if you are, well, take a little pause break and then come back to the video. All right, so you guys notice how I'm kind of rolling my paintbrush. I'm just trying to make sure that I have the brush nicely loaded. So I mentioned that you want natural bristled brushes. One of the reasons why I mentioned today is because those natural fibers are going to absorb the oils and load up a little bit better than a synthetic brush, which is made of kind of plastic material. So you guys can kind of see the difference right now. You can see how much more material is in there than with this one, and I know this is a smaller one as well, but what that means is as you're painting, you have to load up less and you can also get a longer stroke. So let's talk a little bit too about the fact that a open medium is going to get you probably the longest stroke, paint stroke, brush stroke, in comparison to a drying one, unless you have the dried quite thinned out with a lot of excess oil. Again, experiment with the combination of the two, see if you can find your own mixture. Even write down different ratios of mixing oils and see if you can kind of create something that you like for yourself. Okay, so I am gonna lay down just a little bit right in here of the yellow, all the way to the tip. Hang out there. That's gonna be kind of my highlight. And then what I might do is I might come in to thin it out a little bit, maybe wipe my brush off slightly, clean it off to make sure that the thinning oil is actually as light as I am looking for. And now I can get slightly less pigmented applications. You can see how much lighter that is right there. So I may just put down those two yellows for the horn for right now. Go in. You guys can see I've already messed up my technique of keeping my brushes clean. But anyways, the purists recommend the 3-pot method. So up to you. How much of a purist you want to be. Obviously, when you're investing a whole lot of time in a really large project, you better stick to the rules, because mess ups equals time. All right, I'm going to put down a little bit more of my Willoughby's as well, just on the side, so that I have it available to me in case I want it. I may even kind of prime my brush with the oil. And then I may take a little bit of the red. If you haven't mixed your paint in a couple of days, you may want to use your palette knife again, add a little bit more oil, or you could use a firmer bristled brush to then mix it in. So I just want a little bit of this pompadour as a highlight. Maybe starting up here. And I need extra stability because of those 5, well, it wasn't 5, it was 4 shots of espresso. But what I'm doing is I'm supporting, if you are a little shaky when you paint, make sure and get support from wherever you can. So I'm kind of laying my pinky on my test tile, I have my elbows kind of down, and then work in small kind of swipes. Right here I can just apply a little bit of that pompadour. And then on my second firing of this, I could go in and really emphasize that area. I might even come in with a little bit more material and just kind of very gently go in there. If you start with the Overglaze enamels really thick at first, it definitely sits on top of the surface instead of kind of melding in and creating that depth that I keep talking about. So also try it, see what you like. If it's not giving you what you want, then maybe you should do thinner applications. Okay, let's use the synthetic brush as an example. I'm going to clean it out really quickly. I don't know, maybe you can't see. So I've cleaned it out, and I'm going to go in for a little bit of the black, add a tiny bit of oil, roll my brush around, make sure it's nice and loaded with paint. And even though I said work lightest to darkest, maybe I feel like I need a little bit of an outline for myself. So I might come in here and just start applying a tiny bit of black there, just so that I feel like I can have a reference point. Okay, so because that's a drying oil, the cool thing that you can do with that is you can see that my lines are not super refined on the edges. So one thing that you can do with your wipeout tools, once this kind of dries a little bit more, you can tell that it's dried because it goes kind of a chalky consistency, at least with the drying oils. You can come in with your wipeout tool. I like the ones that have this pointed edge that you can see right here for cleaning up the edges of your piece. You can simply come in with the wipeout tool, and you can use it to then crisp up your lines. You want to make sure you're kind of cleaning it off each time. But it can be a really handy way to clean up your lines. It could even be a way for you to remove a little bit of the oil to kind of create a highlight. You could come in here, crisp up that black line a little bit if you wanted to, simply by just moving that oil where you want it to go. It can even be used kind of like a paintbrush. So just keep that in mind. If you make a mistake with this stuff, all you have to do is use a Q-tip. Use a Q-tip, use a little bit of terpenoid on the Q-tip, only a little bit. And you can simply just come in here and wipe out kind of any of your crappy work. Let that dry a little bit, wipe it out again. You may have to go over your Sharpie lines once, but if you just decide, oh man, this is not going where I want it to go, you can simply kind of clean off your entire tile. So there's like a really general, basic kind of version of things. I'm gonna work on some test tiles as I have more time and show you some multi-firings where I can invest a little bit more, but you know, time, somehow it just manages to escape me more and more these days. So a couple other things that I just want to show you before we completely move on. I have some more of my alcohol. surface over here to use as a reference for myself. And in this case, I am not going to transfer an image from my drawings. I am simply just gonna lay down a layer of paint so that you can see some other options, okay? In this case, the bigger the brush, the more material you're gonna need. So I'm gonna lay down a little bit heftier batch of the Willoughbys. I know this brush is clean because I cleaned it before I used it, but if you're unsure, just re-clean your brushes. And again, what I'm essentially doing right here is I'm just trying to kind of prime my brush with some oil. I'm gonna come into this blue color here. I am moving the brush multiple directions just so that I can really load up my brush. I want you guys to get used to also experimenting with just brush strokes in general, like what kind of shapes and textures can I accomplish with different brushes, different shapes of brushes, different textures. All right, so I know I want a little bit thinner of an application. So all I want to show you is some things that can happen with the paint and the wipeout tools. And then just notice how I'm using my flat brush like so, and then I'm also turning it on its side to then get some of the tighter angles where I want them. Okay. I think we're done with that one. Let's also do a large area of lavender oil, the drying oil, so that you can see the results there too. This and this are the drying oils. They're the lavender oil. So you can see that chalky surface, hopefully. Those are not fired on, they're just dry. So, a good example for you as far as checking out the difference between the two. Okay, so this is my drying oil. I'm simply gonna lay down, oh, we're gonna need a little bit more. It's a pretty fluffy brush. And then again, even though this seems like a super fancy process, you can get a little gruff with it. So the less pressure that you put down on your brush, the more you're going to be able to kind of buff in your lines. So right now I'm just very gently kind of swiping against the top of that layer of paint. And you can see it's very different than if I just lay down a line like this. So kind of keep in mind that you can accomplish different textures based off of the way that you use your brushes. To be cleaned in a moment. Stay. All right, so over here we can already see that that thin layer is basically dry. I can use kind of my hand as a fan to try and dry this out, whereas this still looks very much in its liquid, soft format. So, just a little bit longer on these guys. I'll show you over here first. This is an example of the lavender oil. So you can use the lavender oil, dry it out completely, and then what you can do is you can use the wipeout tools to then get a very, very, very fine line, okay? If you're gonna use the wipeout tools with the trying to paint dried like that, you're going to want to keep a towel or a paper towel close to you so that you can frequently be removing the material from your wipeout tool. But even right here on the corner, you can then come in and wipe off that little bit of excess material, and then you're left with a really fine line right there. So this can be a great way to get fine lines. Some people also like to use turpenoid to get the fine lines. I have had personally a little less success with this technique, but you are welcome to try it. What they will do is they will load up one of their brushes with the turpenoid, and then they will skim across the edge right here in order to kind of clean up that area, and they'll go over it a couple of times. So keep that in mind that you could use the turpenoid. I quite like the wipeout tools. Again, you can even use them with the open oil. Another cool thing that happens when you use the wipeout tools is some of this material will pool, so it also creates like another defined line. So keep that in mind too. You can use it to kind of drag material out a little bit if you wanted to. So get really experimental with the way that you're using these. Try a whole bunch of things. What kind of lines can you get by simply using the wipeout tools however you want to. All right, let's show you then some of the more detailed things. Over here, that's going to be a wipeout tool. So I could certainly come in here and really finely use the wipeout tool to clean up this area like so. Some people also really like using a toothpick to create fine lines. So you could use a toothpick by all means if you wanted to. Even again, the back of like your actual paintbrush you can use to kind of scrape in little lines like that. I am gonna try this firmer one right here, see what I can get. But essentially, those are some quick, kind of brutish techniques that you can use for wiping out. But what's kind of cool about the wipeout tools is they will create that nice outline for you. So you can even then come in and kind of remove the excess material around that as well. And then you're just simply left with kind of that more dense outline. So keep in mind that's how you can use it. Those wipeout tools. All right, and then I could simply come in here and use, let's try this fine tip right here. Something like that. And then on my next firing, I could apply blue on top. I could use a whole bunch of other techniques to kind of deepen that and define it more as well. With this guy over here, we could start doing something like this. And then at a later date, you could certainly fill in if you wanted to. You do thin lines like so, if you wanted to add to it. You could follow the shape from the previous one. And so on and so forth and so on and so forth. Gosh darn it. No toothpick. Shame on me. Let's see if I can't find something in my toolkit. Okay, I've got kind of a broken edge. Let's see if it does anything. It's wood, so it should work better. Yeah, so toothpick, it'll get you even finer lines. So kind of keep that in mind, that a wooden tool is also very nice for wiping away material. Kind of gives it a little bit of a different effect. So, some wipeout tools. We're gonna end there with China paints. And we'll come back to it at another time. And I'm gonna make you guys a decal video next. Toodaloo.